Hi, I'm Leanpub from Leanpub, and in this episode of the Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Dave Leeds. Based near Nashville, Tennessee, Dave is a software developer, author, and illustrator whose programming work is particularly focused on mobile development for both Android and iOS. You can follow him on Twitter at DJ Leeds and check out his website at typealias.com and subscribe to his great YouTube channel at typealias. Dave is the author of the book Kotlin, an illustrated guide. In the book, Dave helps you learn how to program in the Kotlin programming language the fun way, with both illustrations and concrete explanations, in a book that steps through the concepts one at a time in order to help you build a solid mental model of the language. In this interview, we're going to talk about Dave's background and career, professional interests, his book, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his experience and process as an author. So thank you very much, Dave, for being on the Leanpub Front Matter podcast.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much, Len.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and how you found your way into a career as a developer and then as an author.
Yeah, sounds great. So I was a child in a military family. My dad was in the U.S. Army. And so we moved around every 2 to 3 years. We were in a new place. So I don't really have a spot that I would look at and say, that's home for me. But my wife and I have been in the Nashville area for over 10 years now. So at this point, we just say we're from Tennessee. My earliest experience with computers was somewhere around maybe 6 or 7 years old. And this was back in the early 80s. So we had definitely no hard drive. We had, at first, not even any floppy drive. But I do remember we had a cassette deck that you could connect to the computer. And you could record the data and then play it back later. So not something I've seen in a very long time at this point. Back in the 80s, they used to have in kids magazines, and I'm sure you're familiar with this one, Len, there used to be basic scripts that you could type in, and they'd be, maybe like a page long. You could type them in and they would make some kind of a little illustration for you or something. And so my brother and I would a lot of times would type those in. We were young enough that we couldn't do touch type at that point. So usually one of us would read the script aloud and the other one would kind of hunt on the keyboard, try to find the right keys to punch in the script. And one of the most memorable things about that for me was we didn't know what the asterisk character is. So if you hit Shift 8 on your keyboard, you get this, what some people would call a star. We didn't know what that was. And so when we were reading it to each other, we called it splat because it kind of looks like if you took something and threw it at the wall and it made a splat on the wall, So I still to this day, if I'm typing a wildcard character, doing splat.txt to find all the text files, right? So good memories there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I just got interrupted. I've never heard splat before. That's fantastic. Of course, it's kind of like, of course, that's what it looks like. We've had, it sounds like you and I are of the same vintage. I have some memories of that kind of thing too. And it is, but we've had people from, across the decades on the podcast before. And as we were talking about before we started recording, a lot of Leanpub authors are programmers themselves. So they've had this sort of various experiences. And yeah, that one thing that's sort of like interesting to reflect on is like, you only have to be as old as we are to remember what it was like to like the magic of being able to actually like play things back, or record, as you said, something that you did and play it back. Like that was not a thing that was like sort of easily available to people in any format, really. I mean, and any electronic format or digital format, I should say. And this sort of ability to record your TV and play back what you saw on there, for example, whenever you wanted to, was a really empowering thing. So anyway, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, that's just the thing that you mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say the ability to have this device where it could do any number of things, right? And you could put in one script and it would do one thing. You could put in another script, it'd do something else. A lot of times with those magazine scripts, I don't know what your experience was with it, but for us, there was always some little difference between the version of BASIC that they had when they wrote this thing and the version of BASIC that we had. And so something would always go wrong, every time. or it'd be not quite right. But it was still a fun process punching it in anyway.
I actually have a specific example of a version of that, which was, did you ever play the game King's Quest?
Oh, yes.
I don't know if you remember this. There was a notorious bug in one version of the game where the answer to a clue for those listening, this was an adventure game. So this is a game where you have a character that you would use the direction keys on your keyboard to move them around in a kind of medieval sort of time and place. And you would sort of like solve puzzles and riddles and stuff like that. And there was the answer to one of the riddles was Rumpelstiltskin. But in the code, the name Rumpelstiltskin was misspelled. Like the E was in the wrong place. And I think
made it even harder to guess then, huh?
Yeah, and I think it was even something like you had to type it backwards or something like that. Anyway, it was something along those lines. And so even if you figured it out correctly, you couldn't solve the problem. So there was this kind of meta issue.
And back in those days, there wasn't like, you couldn't just get the latest patch, It was like what was shipped was what you got. So, yeah. Well, anyway, I guess continuing with some of my experience with programming at an early age, I think anytime that you're learning new skills, I've found that there's always this phase that you go through where you mostly just follow the instructions. So whether you're learning to write software or whether you're learning to cook or to do art, you kind of start off just doing what you're told. And at some point, you kind of reach this fun inflection point where you start being able to take the pieces of what you've learned and put them together for your own thing. So if you're cooking, maybe you've figured out, exactly what flavors work well together. And so you can start making your own recipes. And so for me, it took a little while, but I think probably around 5th grade is when I really started being able to understand programming, not just something I could relay, through the keyboard, but something that I could understand, put things together, and try to make things that were kind of like King's Quest. Making games when you're a kid is always a fun ambition. And so probably about 5th grade is where that change happened for me. And of course, the code is atrocious. If you were to look at it today, I would probably hide my face, bury my face in some pillows in embarrassment. But still, just having the experience early on, getting a chance to learn about programming and just enjoy the experience of it at a young age definitely made a big difference for me. So I kept up with programming just as a hobby throughout junior high and high school. In college, computers was actually my minor. My major was biblical studies. So I was intending to serve in like church ministries or Christian organizations. And after college, I did a little bit of that, and I ended up doing web development on a contract basis to financially support myself to be able to do some of those things. And I'm still very devoted in my Christian faith. Just vocationally, the way things have kind of shaken out for me have been just kind of doing more full-time software development. But the funny thing is that a lot of what I've learned in the biblical studies major in terms of just like the way that you communicate things is actually playing a pretty big role in some of the writing and some of the other sharing that I do. You can imagine things like object lessons, right? Having very tangible things to communicate, concepts that might otherwise be hard, right? Some theology concepts can be kind of hard to grasp, but we bring them down to very tangible things that are easier to relate to. And so a lot of those skills, I think, have actually come in very helpful for me as I've been communicating about software development.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Someone who goes off into the esoteric part of things and has to come back to the community to explain to people who are too busy doing other things. Maybe one morning a week. What's all this going on over here? And you're like, I've been there, and I'm back to tell you, ABC, but I've got to try and tell it to you in terms that you're familiar with, and essentially translate. That makes a lot of sense. And so one question I have that I ask on the podcast every once in a while, if the guest is a programmer, is if you were starting out, and speaking of vintages, if you were starting out now, and you were like, say 18, you just graduated from high school, and you wanted a career as a programmer, would you go to college and study computer science, even as a minor?
Yeah, things have definitely changed over the past 20 years or so. I see that it tends to be less of a requirement now. I think, back in the early days, it was a little bit harder to get a position if you didn't have a computer science degree. I entered the industry as a contractor, which sometimes is a little bit more open to having people who just, based on the work that you can demonstrate that you can do. I would say that, I think there are a lot of good things about college. I think that my older brother is a college professor. And so I see a lot of value there, both in terms of what you would learn and just from the experience that you would get. But it has to make financial sense for what you're doing. And I think the biggest, if I could make one recommendation for people on this, it would really be find a way to pay for it as you go. So if your parents have been able to save up for you to be able to go to college, it's great, and you found a place you want to go, that's great. But I strongly recommend against doing any kind of student loans, just because there are so many people who end up really getting saddled with debt for decades, in some cases, to be able to pay off their degree. And it's really not the time of your life when you need, I'm sure there are 100 things that everybody would rather do with their money, right? Whether it's saving for themselves or giving to organizations that can make a difference in the things that you believe in. So I would say, if you're looking to get into software development, maybe start out by looking at some of the boot camps and seeing if they might make sense for you. There are a lot of them now, and a lot of them are pretty well connected to different companies, so they have ways that they can place you now. If you decide you want to go to college, I would support you in that. I think that's great, but just don't get yourself in debt over it. Find a way to pay for it, get the grants that you need, get any other kind of work that you can do at the same time. Find ways to maybe work with a company, getting some experience while you're getting the degree as well. But avoid the financial debt, and your life will be way better for it.
And that's a really great answer. Thank you very much for that. When it reminds me of an experience I had in my life. So there's debt and then there's debt, right? And so I remember, coming from Canada, we have concepts of what a student loan is that are not the same as they are in the United States, and are not the same as they are in other countries. Now, this is actually a dated reference, but I moved to the UK in 1999, and I remember encountering a coworker there who was he started shaking his head about his student debt. And he's like, I don't know how I'm going to get out from underneath it. It's £5,000, and which is basically $7,000 or something like that. And it's I was empathetic and sympathetic, and everyone has their own situation. But compared to America, particularly in America, where it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, it was well, yeah, you basically got a free education, my friend. But at the same time, that being said, actually things have changed, and tuition is actually quite high in the UK now. And yeah, those considerations really, really do matter. The thing I like to add to these conversations is that, one of the things about going to university, if you can afford it and you can do it, is that you meet all these interesting people that you then have lifelong relationships with. And, if you've ever, the sort of one of the tickets to the middle class, is my friends are doctors and lawyers. And that happens if you go to university, basically. And there's, it's kind of difficult to put money value on that, but at the same time, it's easy to put a money value on $300,000 of student loans. Thinking about how long that's going to take you to pay it off. So, thank you very much for your really nice answer there. That was really good. So you're contracting and stuff like that. And eventually you made your way into creating beautiful content. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you got into, let's start with drawing.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Drawing is another one of those hobbies that I had even as a child. I haven't had any real formal training on the art stuff. Actually, the handful of like art classes that I took in high school, I actually didn't do very well in. I mostly wanted to stay focused on cartoons, and that's not always what the art teacher wants to do. And so the reason that can be an issue is that it's actually one of the slowest parts of the writing process for me. So a lot of times I'll sketch things out ahead of time, and just kind of have a draft sketch of an idea, just kind of rough it out what I think a drawing is going to look like for something. And but when I get to actually drawing the final illustration for it, it can take a few tries because I'm not very well trained. And that's the same kind of thing, for somebody who is coming to software development, for example. If they just haven't had as much experience with it, they will, they'll have to feel around in the dark a little bit. And eventually they'll get something that works basically like they wanted it. But it kind of takes a little bit more effort. That's kind of where I am with the art stuff. I enjoy it. And I've been, over the past year or so, I've been trying to focus on getting better at it so I can just be faster at producing some of these, some of the both videos and some of the videos I do animated pieces as well. So I'm trying to get a little bit faster at it and trying to get a little bit better at it. But it's kind of funny, all the things that I enjoyed when I was a kid, including software development and illustrating and the kinds of mystery books that I liked when I was a kid. All that stuff is still the same for me today.
Yeah, that's really great. That's really great. It's I'm just looking. I'm like, if I look distracted, it's because I'm looking at your book and the sort of the great illustrations in there. I particularly like the kind of buckets where you're talking about. This is now we're sort of like moving into the territory of the book, but variables are in programming are kind of buckets that you think of them that way, that you can put any kind of number into them, and actually seeing that kind of like illustrated buckets with different numbers on them and stuff like that is actually a really great kind of aid to kind of like getting the concept, which is just fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the funny thing about that is I remember when I first started writing about Kotlin, it was late 2017, and I have a vivid memory of sitting on the couch on a Saturday morning drinking coffee with my wife, which we do almost every Saturday, and we were just kind of talking about some of the writing that I was planning on doing. And she said, Dave, I think you should include some of your cartoon illustrations in some of what you're writing. And I was like, I appreciate that, but I kind of want this to be a little more professional feel to it and everything. And so I didn't do that for the first probably, 4 to 6 months. I didn't include any illustrations. And eventually I got to some topics that were just kind of easier to explain if you had illustrations. So I started adding them, and go figure, that's what everybody connected with the most. And so that's just kind of, I just kind of kept running with what worked. People seemed to really connect with the drawings. And so I kept doing that. And at this point, it kind of, I guess, became a bit of a bit of a brand for me, or it's kind of my niche at this point.
Yeah, no, it's very good. The drawings are very recognizable as well. I would say, having looked at a few of them and having watched your really, really good videos that you make as well.
Thank you.
And and it's very interesting having seen sort of many books over the years. If anyone's watching and they're thinking of writing their own book, one of the things to do is not to be too presumptuous about what people want from you. Try things and see, and if there's something you're good at and you enjoy, it's possible that actually is something other people might enjoy. You might think that you want to write the sort of like big serious kind of programming book, and you might try that, and it might find an audience, and it could be that if you add a cool picture, people like it even more, even if it's the exact same serious programming book. People do like sort of fun and enjoyment and things like that. And your book in particular, so it's let's move on to talk about it.
Sure.
It's a Kotlin, an illustrated guide. And it is meant I believe both for kind of absolute beginners and people who are like absolute beginner programmers, and people who are already programmers, but just want to learn Kotlin.
Yeah, that's right. I've actually, and I'm sure you've probably talked with a lot of authors about the challenge of how do you present something that is useful to a wide range of developers, regardless of their skill level. And what I found is that everybody, regardless of almost of your experience level, everybody has some more experience in certain things than other people, right? So, maybe you've worked more in a particular language, maybe you've worked more on server-side APIs than I have. And so you've got your particular experience and you understand terms to mean a certain thing in that context. But there are other things that, maybe I know that are just kind of more tenuous for you. But all of us have some amount of this cloudiness of understanding at some point. So regardless of who you are, regardless of how experienced you are, with enough questions, I can get to the edge of your understanding, right? And you could do the same for me, because we can't. Programming is too big of a world for us to have all of it in our head and to have the level of precision that we might expect everybody to have. So all that to say that we all have things that we understand well. We all have things that we kind of just learned enough to get by, right? We kind of learn what we need to in order to just do what we need to day to day, but we haven't really gone deep on those things. So everybody's coming from a little bit of a different place. And so how do you present concepts that are not going to bore the people who are very experienced, but you're not going to lose the people who are less experienced? And so I'm doing my best to accommodate everybody. Because what I've found is the books that I've read where somebody presented something in a vivid, concrete way, and even in an entertaining way, a lot of times, even if I understood those concepts previously, it shines a new light on it, and it gives me new perspective on it, and it solidifies my understanding of those things. And so now it's ingrained in my mind better than it was before, whereas maybe before I had a little bit more of a tenuous foundation on that topic, but I knew it well enough to skate by. After reading something that explains things well, that gives me a good entertaining approach to it, I found that I'm not bored by it. I actually enjoy reading it, and it actually does something for me. Even if it's not, reaching up to the higher rungs of the ladder of the programming language, it's giving me a more solid foundation, if that makes sense. And so my approach in the book is really to be very clear on all the terms. And so that does mean even things like a variable. What is a variable, right? The very first thing I start off with in the book, in order to kind of level set on the ground, is this is a circle. Okay, everybody can relate to a circle, right? No matter how old you are, you can take a kid, who's barely done any drawing at all, and they can look at that and say, that's a circle. I understand what that is. And so I'm trying to start off with a very approachable, relatable, concrete examples to really tie things to. But I also don't camp out there too long. So a lot of times I'll introduce something, introduce a concept. I'll try to use a lot of precision of language, especially when defining a term, so that we can take things that, just for example, some people would say, what's the difference between a lambda, a closure, and a nonce function, and a function literal, right? And they're all kind of related concepts and very tied together. And sometimes we even might use some of those terms interchangeably. But I'm trying to make sure that as I'm writing this book, I'm not just using things interchangeably, that I'm very precise in the language. So I will define pretty much every technical term along the way is defined, and a lot of times illustrated and pointed out in code if necessary. But I also, like I said, I don't camp out there. I don't hang out there forever. I assume that you're going to read that, understand it, mull it over, and as we move on, that's going to be the basis, the foundation upon which the next chapter is going to be built. So what I really am aiming for in this book is a cumulative way to learn concept upon concept, the most important things that you're going to need to know as a Kotlin developer from day to day.
Yeah, that's a really great explanation. I really loved the circle that you use at the beginning. I mean, like it's to introduce people to sort of variables and functions and things like that. 2 pi r is the circumference of a circle, but they're just looking at a circle and like thinking about it. And then that the circle figure sort of repeats throughout the book as you discuss other things, which is really just brilliant, because it's it's one of those reminders when you were talking. I was thinking about an experience I had once. When it comes to like where you are in your work and how you understand what you're doing. Sometimes you need these reminders. And I remember one time I was an investment banker, and I was doing sort of very complex financial modeling, and I was having trouble with something. And one of my colleagues just looks at me and goes, "Lan, a model is a system of inputs that generates output." And I'm like, oh, okay. I just needed that. I just needed that reminder that like, this is what you're doing. You're creating some inputs. It's just creating some outputs. That's all you're actually really doing. And it's like, oh, and like a lot of times, like looking at programming books and things like that, it's kind of like, oh, like a little reminder, but like, yeah, a function is this and a variable is that, and things like that can be like incredibly useful to be just reminded how like beautiful these ideas actually are.
Yeah, that's great. I think the like most concepts that I've gone through in the book so far, I've been able to find some sort of a tangible metaphor, real life metaphor that I'm hoping is approachable and relatable for most people. And the idea is that if I can explain this to someone who's not technically minded, at least in a way that they could understand the concepts at a high level, it's going to be even more effective for somebody who is technically minded.
And just before we move on to the last part of the interview, for those listening who have been just mystified this whole time, what's Kotlin?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Kotlin is it's a general purpose programming language that JetBrains introduced. So you probably have heard of JetBrains for their wide range of IDEs. The idea that a company that has exposure to pretty much all programming languages and has generated ASTs for all these languages, have developed the tooling to compile and do inspections on all of these languages. The idea that they could produce their own language was pretty exciting to me, and so that's kind of how I ended up falling in love with the language. But it is a general purpose programming language. It can target lots of different architectures and things. You can most popularly it's used on JVM alongside Java frequently. It's used primarily now in Android development. I think most of the apps out there now are the top 1,000 apps. Almost all of them now are using Kotlin. It can target JavaScript. It can experimentally target WebAssembly. It can also target a variety of native architectures as well. So if you want to run it just kind of like out of command line on your Windows or Mac or whatever, it'll do that as well. It's got I believe it's got a really good balance of pragmatism and also like good practice baked into it. So things like, for example, if you want to create a read-only variable or a mutable variable, either way, it takes the same number of keystrokes. We don't have to type like final ahead of it, right? Where it's where you have to pay a higher toll in some languages to do what you might regard as kind of the better practice of making it immutable. And so Kotlin's done a really good job on that. Their support for lambdas and all that has been really, pretty well first class. Whereas we've had some other languages where it's had to been kind of retrofit onto the language. So Kotlin is one of those languages that has really delighted me as a developer. I got involved in it back when it was first in beta and started using it professionally probably in early 2017. So great language. If you haven't looked at it yet, definitely check it out. I think you'll enjoy using it.
In the last part of the interview, I always like to talk to people if they're authors about their process for creating things like ebook files and stuff like that. And you've got in addition to creating an ebook file, because you've used our upload writing mode, so you're creating it your own way.
That's right.
You also do illustrations, and I imagine that's kind of like been a journey of its own. And so I was wondering if you could talk about a little bit, like, how did you start doing illustration and how do you do it now?
So when I first started using illustrations in some of my writing, just on my website, I was using an iPad, and had an Apple Pencil, and the most common app for drawing on iPads probably got to be Procreate. And so I was using that to just kind of sketch out a few little things here and there. I found that over time, just as the quantity of illustrations increased, the process of drawing on an iPad, transferring it to my computer, getting it loaded into my markdown file or whatever, all of that was a lot of overhead. And then if I needed to go back and make changes to it, I'd have to go back to the iPad, right, and go through that again. So eventually I got a Wacom tablet that's connected to the desktop computer, so I can just work on it, sketch things out here. If I want to just do a light sketch, I can do that beforehand. I typically, as I'm writing, I will start off with just a quick sketch, because just like the text might very well change, an illustration could change as well, and I don't want to commit to a nicely a nice clean illustration if there's a good likelihood that I'm gonna have to go back and change it later.
And so just so I can get the image in my head, not being an illustrator myself. So it used to be that you would do things on your iPad and then you would transfer those files to your computer. But now you've got something that's actually like a pad that's connected to your computer.
That's right. Yes.
So you can draw down here. I'm making, for people who are listening, I'm making hand gestures, but you can draw down here kind of. And are you watching the screen or are you watching the pad when you're doing?
Yeah, you have a few different options for how you do that when you have a tablet connected to your computer. Some of them are just flat on the, they'll sit next to your keyboard, for example, and you can draw, and you'll be controlling the cursor and everything on your screen. The other option then is a bit more affordable than it used to be, is getting a tablet that is actually a monitor as well. So you're drawing just like on an iPad, you'd be drawing right on the screen. You can do that here. Some illustrators who are better than me actually prefer the kind that is on, that is just a tablet that does not have the screen baked in, because then they've got their monitors all, very finely configured to get exactly the right color and that kind of thing. A lot of times the tablets that have the monitors baked in are, not quite as high quality on the actual video signal. But for me, it's been working really well.
When it comes to, so for anyone listening who's thinking like, I want to write a programming book or something like that, you have really good, in addition to illustrations, you have really good code sample images. And I was wondering if you could explain how you get those.
When you say the code sample images, you're just talking about like the code listings and just kind of how they look, or?
Yeah, how they look. I mean, they've got like nice rounded corners. I'm just looking at them right now and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, I guess one thing that I should probably mention for the listeners is that for my book, I've been writing it for a few years and publishing it online on my website. So it's been going through a regular, markdown to HTML flow. And so I was able to do some code listings on the website with CSS and get it to look like I wanted. And when I just now started introducing the Leanpub edition of this, I wanted to kind of keep that same feel to it as I put it in the PDF. And so, for the website, of course, CSS does all the magic for me, which is really nice. For my process of writing new chapters and publishing the PDF here, I'm actually really glad that you all offer, I was really glad that you all offer a way to just upload a PDF, because like I said, I've already been authoring kind of with my own setup. I know you guys have a lot of fancy authoring tools as well, which are probably helpful for a lot of people. In my case, I've got all these illustrations, these code samples and everything that I really want to align very particularly on the page. I still have a little bit of work to do to finalize some of that, but I'm able to use, I could use InDesign, for example. I'm actually using Affinity's publisher, which is a kind of a comparable software that is a one-time purchase, which is kind of a nice option. So I've been using that to lay out the page, and that includes the code listings like you're talking about. I was able to find ways to make that a repeatable process. The tough part about that, though, is that it is out of sort of automation flow. And so it requires a lot of just like dragging things in. I'm able to, I'm able to create kind of like snippets of layout, if that makes sense. So like different sized code snippets, I can just kind of click and drag them in and then paste the code in. But it is still quite a manual process, which is part of the reason why it took me a little while to get around to being able to publish the first Leanpub edition here.
Yeah, no, that's that. Thank you very much for sharing that story. I mean, it's so great for people who, when they start getting into writing, they're like, why is this so hard? And it's like, it's actually just kind of hard. We try and make things easier with our own writing flows. So does everybody who makes a tool. But one of the reasons there's a couple of reasons we have the upload writing mode that you're using. One is that a lot of authors are very particular about they come with their own process. They're like, why would I have to change it to sort of adapt to you? Let me just upload my great thing that I've made. Another reason is that you can use Leanpub's writing processes to create your book and publish it in progress. But when you're done, you can do, for example, a tool you mentioned called InDesign, for example. Like when you're done writing your manuscript, you actually can either yourself or hand it off to a professional book designer, go create these sort of professional sort of ebook files, and then you can switch your writing mode and upload to Leanpub after you're done writing. So the two things aren't incompatible, but the work it takes to get things right, truly right. It's like, what's the whole 80-20 or whatever one's analogy is. It's that last mile that can often be the hardest, but that can be the difference between a book that's really helpful to people and a book that's kind of frustrating. And that's kind of what happens in the end. The last question I always like to ask on the podcast, if the guest has published a book on Leanpub, is if there was one magical feature we could build for you, or if there was one thing that had you shaking your fist and swearing at the screen whenever you were using Leanpub that we could fix for you, is there anything you can think of that you would ask us to do?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that. I am very new to the platform, as you probably know. At this point, I don't have any specific feedback for you. Like I said, I've particularly enjoyed being able to upload the PDF manually. That's been a big thing for me, and I honestly wasn't sure about that at first. So for anybody who, like me, has content that you really need to be particular about the way it's laid out, I wasn't aware that was an option when I first heard about Leanpub. So definitely, I'd encourage you to not let that be something that gets in your way. New to the platform, I don't have any feedback for you yet, but I'll be publishing new updates over the next few months. I'm hoping to finalize the book here probably in the next 4 to 6 months or so. And so I will definitely be sure to jot down anything that comes to mind as I continue through that process.
Awesome. Well, yeah, no, please reach out anytime. You've obviously got my contact details and everything like that. And we love hearing, I mean, insofar as Leanpub is a good platform, it's because of authors like you sort of giving us their occasional sort of chin up and finger wags and things like that. So anything you can do, any sort of suggestions that you have, we're open to. Well, Dave, thank you very much for taking some time out of what I'm sure was a beautiful afternoon in Tennessee. And thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Thank you.